Hello and welcome to Yadnya Investment Academy. In our previous video, we saw what is GDP and how it is calculated. The calculated GDP there was in nominal terms. But now question arises, what is difference between nominal and real GDP? Let us understand with an hypothetical example. Let us assume country A, which only produces apples. Now the GDP of the country would be the quantity of apples multiplied by the price of apple. Now let us assume country A produces 100 apples in year 1, selling price of one apple being rupees 10. As the country produces only apples and no other product, the GDP of the country would be rupees 1000. In year 2, suppose country A now produces 110 apples. The selling price of apple has now increased to rupees 12. So the GDP will be 1320 rupees. Now, what does this 1320 indicates? It indicates the nominal GDP of country A. Increase in GDP from 1000 to 1320 is not just because of the increase in quantity from 100 to 110, but also because of the increase in price from 10 to 12 rupees per apple. So if you want to know the real growth of country's economy, then we must calculate the GDP of country A of year 2 in price of year 1. So now the price will be 10 and the quantity will be 110. So the GDP of year 2, the real GDP of year 2 will be 1100 rupees. So difference between nominal and real GDP can be clearly seen. And we can say the real growth in GDP is 10%, that is from 1000 rupees to 1100 rupees. Now taking real GDP values of India from 2015 to 2016, the nominal GDP increased from 136.75 trillion to 152.51 trillion in Indian rupees term. That is an increase of around 11.5%. These values in US dollars are 2.112 trillion and 2.264 trillion dollars. When we refer to a country's GDP at current price, it is mostly this nominal GDP in US dollars which is referred. So if someone asks you what is India's GDP in 2016, then it is 2.264 trillion dollars. But this 11.5% is not referred as GDP growth, as it includes inflation component as well. We have not mentioned the growth in terms of US dollars here, as these two values cannot be compared due to change in exchange rates in separate years. Hence, there is no relation between the nominal GDP of 2 years in other currency terms. Therefore, whenever growth of GDP is mentioned, it is mentioned by comparing real GDP of 2 years, because to calculate real GDP, a base year is chosen and then value from that year forward will be considered to determine the actual growth in GDP after adjusting for inflation. Real GDP is always calculated and referred to a constant US dollar or rupee price of a particular year. India's real GDP increased from $2.301 trillion to $2.465 trillion at 2010 constant dollar price. That is an increase of around 7.1%. So this figure of 7.1% is always referred as GDP growth. For developing countries where there is high inflation, real GDP value is always lower than nominal value because it is adjusted for inflation. But here in dollar terms, this value is coming higher. This is because exchange rate difference between 2010 on which real GDP is calculated and 2015-16 on which nominal GDP is calculated was very high. So that is all we have on this topic. If you have any question, please do write in the comment section below, and have a great time ahead.